Has Snow White been canceled or moved again? And to where? This morning on the Walt Disney Company earnings call, during a series of prepared remarks, CEO Bob Iger rattled off a litany of things coming to theaters from Disney in 2024 and 2025. And glaringly obvious was the absence of any mention of the live-action remake of Snow White starring Rachel Ziegler and Gal Gadot. Now, this movie has undergone a series of reshoots and controversies in the last year, and now it's left me wondering, where has it gone?
Renegade Online.
The key to our success in streaming, and what consistently brings consumers back for more, is the array of exceptional content we produce that captivates audiences of all ages and backgrounds. Looking at our film studios, we have a number of highly anticipated theatrical releases arriving over the next few months, including Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which opens this Friday, as well as Pixar's Inside Out 2, Marvel's Deadpool and Wolverine, and 20th Century Studios' Alien Romulus, which are all slated for this summer. Later this year, we're looking forward to Moana 2 and Mufasa the Lion King. And in 2025, our slate remains just as robust with Captain America Brave New World, Fantastic Four, Elio, Zootopia 2, and Avatar 3.
He did not mention Snow White.
Our series also continue to resonate with audiences and critics alike.
Did not mention Snow White.
Shogun has proven to be a global hit.
We have not heard on a Disney earnings call before the volume of questions specifically related to basically studios and even more specifically theatrical release IPs. I mean, there must have been 4 or 5 different questions from different people in there that was forcing Bob to steer into that. Marvel specifically being routinely brought up. I know people were wondering, well, why don't they bring up Star Wars? Well, because Star Wars hasn't been out there very much, so there's nothing to really complain about in the sense that it's failing because it's just simply not there. It's hidden. Marvel, on the other hand, the reason why the Marvel question kept coming up is because the movies have been failing and failing and failing and failing and failing, and they are a drag on Disney's operating income, revenues, balance sheet, every single thing out there. They have been an absolute mess, and everybody is looking at this like, and even the question came up, what are we doing since 2019? Talking about Endgame at the peak of it. Marvel is not worth anywhere near what it was, and Bob really kind of seemed to me, Iger was very energetic talking about the future of sports and the streaming of sports and all this kind of stuff, and then he was seemingly far less enamored with trying to figure out a way to talk about Marvel and studio IPs. And as I mentioned before, when Iger, during his prepared remarks, rattled off the list of what's coming in 2024 and the list of what's coming theatrically in 2025, and Snow White was not mentioned as a release for Disney in 2025. That should have been at the top of the list or near the top of the list for Disney. Wasn't even mentioned, so now we all have to wonder, have they cacked this movie completely? Are they pushing it back even further? Do they not know at this point if or when it's even coming out? I found that very bizarre. Then he mentioned the 2025 slate, theatrical. And he was talking about Thunderbolts. He was talking about Captain America 4 or Captain Falcon. They talked about, I think he listed 4 or 5 movies because he was saying that, hey, we have a slate this year and the slate next year will be about the same. I'm paraphrasing. That's what he said in terms of number. He did not mention Snow White.
Uh-oh!
There was no mention of Snow White. Now, if we remember, because this was a huge story last year, especially in the summer, that Snow White originally slated to come out a month and a half ago. It was supposed to come out late March, so maybe about 6 weeks ago is when it was originally supposed to release. And everybody got a first look last year with that leaked photo And we found out that this was not going to at all be Snow White. This was going to be some new derivative of Snow White, where she don't need no man and all this kind of stuff. And the dwarves weren't dwarves anymore. They were 5 magical hippies from the Gap or whatever.
The prince was a stalker. Weird.
Right, exactly. So then it got pulled from the slate with this excuse of, well, the actor strikes, right? And I know the actor strikes have an impact on Disney maybe not being able to put out as much as they would like to this year. Fine and dandy. I know that impacted a lot of places out there, but the problem with Disney is, as we all know, is that they seem to engage in massive reshoots on damn near everything, at least in terms of Disney property. Let's forget Fox stuff for a second. But at least in terms of the traditional Disney property. Well, Snow White was one of those. So they pushed it back a full year to 2025. Disney announced this. They were moving it back a year to March of 25 into that theatrical slot. Bob Iger did not mention Snow White. And I'm not talking about during a Q&A when he was off the cuff. I'm talking about in his prepared remarks, his carefully scripted prepared remarks. This movie was not among the 4 or 5 other movies mentioned as coming out in 2025. What should we take from that? Because it seems to me that either one of 2 things is happening. This movie is being pushed back again to some unknown date because it's still such a disaster and they're still shooting it and the costs are running up into the ceiling, or they're going to bury this thing on Disney Plus. Gentlemen, which is it?
Well, first of all, Jonas, do you know the poster that we have in our back channels? Is that legit?
I don't think that's legit.
Okay, I'm not going to pull it up.
If they were talking about it today, it's a little too on the nose. And no, I don't think that's legit. And it's fine. It's some fan recreation, I think. Usually Disney would go with a single image rather than a photo of the star for their first stuff.
It's hard to tell these days what's parody and what's not from Disney. That's the problem.
That's right. The thing that I'll point out, Mark Webb, who is the same guy who directed Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2, he's a guy who probably plays ball with the studio pretty well. No comment on Wes Ball, who's directing Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes there. I get the feeling that this is massive reshoots. Obviously, the last thing that we've seen out of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. There's also press that's come out of Rachel Ziegler talking about the disaster of a year that she's had in the past. The last thing that we saw was an image of 7 dwarfs sitting around Snow White. Looks like one of them looks like George R.R. Martin in a way that is not actually George R.R. Martin. One of them actually looks a lot like Tommy Lee Jones, but it seems like they're trying to say they're not actually dwarfs, but instead they are magical creatures or something like that. Yeah, that guy in the bottom right. I think that's probably Tommy Lee Jones playing Grumpy. And it just hasn't hit the press yet.
It's bizarre. And this is from October of 23. And this was Forbes magazine, and of course this was after the weird pics that we had a few months earlier in the summer. So there's a lot of rework going on with this film, and we talked about the fact that, I mean, they had basically finished the film. They had finished principal photography. They were in post-production. The movie could have come out if it was ready to go. It obviously wasn't ready to go, and by that point,
this is a 2-movie budget now. Then.
Yeah, we're going to be approaching probably. We're talking Indiana Jones. We're getting close to $400 million here, I bet. When it's all said and done.
What this means is, if you look at what happened with Helldivers, right? The community came out and spoke out, and Sony acquiesced to their demands. You look at Snow White; they're not real happy about its prospects, and that's because I think that we represent the vast majority of the market. And it's not because we're some sort of we're not a quadrant of gurus here, but rather we simply look at this with logic and go, wait a minute, this doesn't look very good. This is not what our audience wants. And I think that the community at large now, the mainstream middle, is having a huge impact on these companies. I think they're starting to have to listen to us. They had tremendous elitism for so long, and now they're having to bear with the burden of what has come upon them by choosing not to listen to the market and to divorce themselves from the idea that They have to do what the fans want. They had this narcissism, and you heard it from people like Zegler, and you heard it from Iger for so long. This very disassociated kind of view of the market, where we're going to tell you what you want. We're going to tell you what kind of Star Wars you want. We're going to tell you what you want in the theme parks. And none of that has worked. The chickens have come home to roost. And, we're seeing it with the stock right now. I wonder what Peltz is thinking today.
Let me ask you a question. You're right about dumping Snow White onto Disney Plus would be, a huge cost to DTC when they're desperately struggling. But we would be theoretically talking about something a year from now. So who knows where the line is for Snow White. But let me ask y'all this. What would be worse? Let's say Snow White does come in, even after film tax credits, $350 million net after film tax credits. I mean, we're talking like Indiana Jones level, oh, this is bad. Is it worse for Disney to drop that movie into theaters? Because that, I think, is the concern. To drop that movie into theaters and have it be another absolute catastrophe and humiliation versus throw it on Disney Plus, have it impact the bottom line there for maybe a quarter or so. I mean, seriously, because they'll take the bulk of the costs up front and then amortize, over time. What's worse, hiding it on Disney Plus and eating it there, or throwing it in the theaters and suffering a very potentially public humiliation again?
Here's what I think they do. And you can take this for free, Bob, if you want my advice on this. You wait until Avatar: The Way of Fire, or whatever it is you're going to call Avatar 3, something that is definitely going to hit more than $1 billion, because you guys and your broken creative engine have nothing to do with it. And it's something that people are excited to see. You wait until something like that comes up, and then you release it after you have your sure thing with your $1 billion. Then you say, oh, by the way, we'll be filling in the schedule with Snow White. So they can do this sleight of hand that they always do and say, oh, we had $6 billion in revenue. Never mind the fact that it's global and they take a fraction of a percentage of a fraction of that ticket price. I think this one has to make it to theaters, or they will anger Gal Gadot. They'll anger Rachel Zegler, who will rip them apart publicly, because that woman has shown that she will say anything publicly to protect herself.
I think they would negotiate with them up front and say, we're going to give you a big fat check for residuals that otherwise won't be there, so please don't go out and do this, or we're going to take the money back. I mean, that's what you do. Mm-hmm. That's how you can do it. But, I agree with you. Otherwise, they're going to go out there and dunk on that decision.
So it's going to be, they're going to take someone else's record and try to hide it behind that. That's the Bob Iger style here. If you have something bad to say, you find something good that's not that overshines it, and then you kind of slip it behind there and try to announce it similarly on the same day. I don't think right now that they can afford to take a $300 million hit in DTC until that thing is really banging. So Hulu has to hit, ESPN has to hit. If they're taking massive losses on ESPN and they can hide Snow White behind it, that would be the strategy, I think, for releasing Snow White direct to consumer.
Potentially so.
Or they put it on linear at the same time and say, oh, and then they split the costs.
Yeah. I really my mind is spinning right now trying to figure out what's the plan here, because that movie not being mentioned was shocking. Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.